Hello. Today we are going to be quickly painting up an Ultramarine based on this very basic scheme I have tested out on his arm here. This is mainly dry brushing, so let's get right to it. We start off with a base coat of Cantor Blue. This is sprayed throughout the entire miniature on top of a black or gray primer, and then using some Ultramarine Blue, we start dry brushing all over the miniature here. Continue on to the shoulder pads and the back here. This can be done quite liberally. This is the first coat. We want this to basically pick out any of the raised surfaces that would be hitting the light, or having the light hit it rather, while still keeping the Cantor Blue in the recesses to get some depth to our shadows. Next stage is to take some Calgar Blue and dry brush it over the more raised surfaces of the miniature, focusing on the areas that would be catching more of the light than the previous layer. I generally say you should be covering about 50% of the previous layer with this tone, and the same will be said going forward for the next two. You're going to want to cover less and less area with each successive dry brush, focusing on the areas where the light would hit the miniature. So here with the Lothern Blue, I'm mainly focusing on raised edges, such as around the neck piece, on the shoulder pad, and the raised parts of the arms and leg pauldrons. Again, really only just lightly tickling the mini at this point, so it's only catching the hard edges with very minimal surface dry brushing going on here. And finally, we'll use some Basecoat Blue, however you're supposed to pronounce that, all over the miniature here. Again, tickling less of an area, tickling very lightly. As well, if you see throughout my video here, I don't have all my assets due to a GPU death. So the paint callouts that come up will have either an AP for Army Painter or GW for Games Workshop. All AP stuff are War Painter fanatics. Next up, we use some Abaddon Black to pick out the undersuit across the miniature, mainly in between the legs and arm joints here. Now, using some Griff Charger Gray, we're going to go and pick out all of the various recesses of the armor, such as these vents here, the parts where the panels separate or become different panels, the various different leg grooves, for example. This will help them all just pop out a little bit more in combination with our dry brush highlighting that we've done, and just make the whole miniature pop. So go throughout the entire mini and do that. You don't need to use Griff Charger Gray, but you typically want to use a bluish, dark blue contrast wash or contrast paint here. The blue is to help it still retain itself as a blue shade, and the darkness is to obviously help it be a shade. So you could also use Nuln Oil if you want, but it would be much darker and not allow the blue to pop out nearly as much. So this is what we've got after recess shading the whole thing. As you can see, there's a lot more depth in this miniature now with the dry brush and the shading. As this squad is going to be from the second company, I'm going to start with some Baylor Brown around the armor pauldron trim and use that to create the base for the company colors. Just do this around the entire rim of the shoulder pad here, as well as these leg shields, these tilt shields. I don't know what you'd call these. They're like bigger tilt shields for your shoulders, for your hips. So we're going to give them an even coat of Baylor Brown as well. Once that is dry, we're going to use some demonic yellow from the army painter lineup and edge highlight the areas that we gave this tone. So the hip shields here, as well as the shoulder pauldron. For the leather straps, I start with some leather brown from the army painter and just give everything a nice base coat. Takes 2 thin coats, but once done, everything is nice and ready for the next step. That next step specifically is taking some strong tone wash and spreading it all throughout the brown pouches and the belt on the miniature. Let that dry before going on to the next step. With some Gothor brown, we're going to dry brush lightly over the various leather bits as best as we can. If you can't get access in there with the dry brush, an edge highlight will be applicable. And then follow that up with some Mournfang brown to bring some variation into the leather bits. Off screen, I quickly picked out the metallic bits using some plate mail metal and a Nuln Oil wash, as is typical of my steelish metal. I gave the belt a black coat, as well as the Aquila got painted with some greedy gold and then a red wash. In my case, I used Reikland Flesh Shade for that. Purity seals are quite simple. We're going to start off with the wax bit, painting it in its base coat of Screamer Pink. Careful not to get any on the pauldrons, or not pauldrons, leg greaves, whatever you want to call them. Next up, take some Rekarth flesh, careful not to get it on the legs, and pick out the base coat for the scrolls there. Might take 2 thin coats to get an even coverage with this tone, but it will be worth it in the long run. Don't forget, the scroll has edges, so make sure to hit the edge of the parchment there as well. To highlight the wax seal, we're going to use some Pink Horror, and we're going to start by dabbing a small dot in the middle of the seal to create a raised point where, you know, the dabber or whatever that set that on there was pulled away. And then we're going to pick out the edge of the wax itself. Do not worry about this being quite stark at the moment. This will appear less stark in the future step. We're going to take some Screaming Skull and pick out the upper layer of the parchment and edge highlight the bottom layer. This will give an illusion of depth and shading that will be further enhanced by a future step. Using a fine tip brush and some Abaddon Black, I would just do some random squiggles along the edge of the parchment here. Take your time. I kind of rushed this a little bit and some of them got bigger than I wanted, but overall, you know, it doesn't have to be legible or even be logical. It just needs to kind of create the effect of text on a scroll, and that can very easily be done with some dots and scribbles. Next, we're going to use a Carabung Crimson wash and wash the wax part of the purity seal. While after that dries, we're going to take some Seraphim Sepia and just run that over the entirety of the parchment there. Let that dry completely as well. So far, the miniature is going well. There's a couple of kit bash things I've done here. So the shoulder pad I had to clip away and add on from a 3D printed bit. Same with the little belt piece. As you can see, the seam there is not well hidden. I haven't bothered with this. The gun that's going to be in front of the Infernus Marine will hide that seam. So I didn't bother doing any fancy, green stuffing or anything to try to hide that. But At this point in our painting process, we are left with this. As you can see, we've basically created what I've done for the arm here, and on the arm as well. I gave a hand at doing some freehand. It got a little bit messy by the end of it, but overall, this is meant to be a quick speed paint and an example for what I would like my force to look like overall, my Ultramarines, so I'm not overly worried about the freehand being a little bit sloppy. I have plenty of time to improve on that. These Marines are going to be from the second company, so I'm using yellow on the trim. Every Marine of a different company, I'm going to do their trim differently, and I'm creating an army that takes forces from multiple companies, so you'll see different recipes as time goes on here. Now, to create the base, I quickly wanted to try a different method of creating a marble base. I've done them in the past. It starts by spraying down some greedy gold through what is supposed to be a wet wipe. I didn't have wet wipe, so I tried doing it through this fluff, and it didn't really work. Once the gold is down, you spray some wraithbone over the top, all of this being done on a black base, and what you're supposed to get is something that looks like marble with gold flecks in it. And I mean, this clearly wasn't the right medium to do it with, but it doesn't look too far off. This is what I was going for. This is something I've done on a 3D printed Eldar proxy before. This is literally the same recipe, but just done through the wet wipe. So that's the effect I'm going for with my bases on my Ultramarines. But because I'm experimenting here, I decided to try my hand at freehanding some veins of like gold ore throughout the base here. So I started off by just kind of creating geometric patterns, straight lines, with my brush here, using some greedy gold again. As you'll see, once I'm happy with how this is done, I will start filling in some of the areas where they meet to create a less uniform kind of like, these kind of look like scratches right now. I'll try to make them look like ore in the ground. I would say the effect comes off okay. You're not going to win any golden demons with it, but it's a quick and easy way of painting a decent base without having to get out your texture paints and all that other crap. To highlight the gun, I gave everything a Baden Black base coat before taking some Thunderhawk Blue and dry brushing it across the entire gun. Basically areas I wanted to be black at the end of the day. Because I was going to take some plate mail metal, and run that over the front cowl and nozzle of the gun, as well as the canister, the fuel canister, and the little gear thing that all Primaris weapons seem to have. So we're going to give this a couple of thin coats. Metallic paints can get quite runny if you thin them out too much, so be careful. If you thin them out too much, you'll start filling the holes of the gun with the paint, which is something you don't want to do. Well, you might want to do, and then you can just let your wash create the shade effect in there, but by future steps are going to add more wash onto that barrel, and the more washes you put into the holes, the less deep they are and the less defined they are. So for now, it's good to just try to keep paint out of there to ensure we can keep that detail. And with that done, you can see I've got the metals everywhere, so I'm going to take some Mephiston red and pick out the various red bits on the gun, such as these little, I don't know, buttons and doohickeys, whatever they are, they're getting a red coat for visual interest's sake. And then for the kind of like torched metal effect, I started off using some Magos purple and highlighted the very tip of the flamer cowl. While that was still somewhat wet, I took some Griff Charger Gray and painted a little bit of an overlap, but also continuing down the barrel, a bluish effect. Before repeating that process with some Seraphim Sepia. The purity seal, as you can see, got the exact same treatment as the purity seal we painted earlier. And once this gun was dried, I would go through and highlight the arm bit that you can see holding the grip that's not properly highlighted, as you can see in this image, so that it can go onto the miniature. Originally, when I put this miniature together, I had not been aware of the fact that the kit bash should kind of offset where the gun arm was going to be, so they didn't quite line up. Because I used super glue, I put this in the freezer, I popped the arm off later, and I made it all line up nicely. I also spilled a little bit of super glue on the back of the power pack there. I fixed that by giving it a Griff Charger gray wash, something that wouldn't overpower the blue, but also tone down the glossiness and the frosting of the glue, before giving the whole thing a ultra matte varnish, which de-glossed the spill and defrosted the spill. Now finally, we have the helm, which unfortunately most of my footage goes out of focus about now. Basically, I was just using the helm of this character, not the helm fully, but the face mask, and painting that in their company colors. This is how I'm going to tell squads apart. So here we have this 3D printed helm with its yellow chapter colors, company colors, sorry, not chapter colors, company colors, mask picked out, and we're going to go through and pick out the metallic, what would you call this, filigree or edging of this helmet here. So just pick out that all with metallics, with the same plate metal steel we used earlier. With that all kind of picked out, take some gritty gold, pick out the laurels, and it's up to you if you want to paint the Ultramarine symbol that same gritty gold or pick it out in a white, as I have done, as you will see in the next clip here. As you can see, the gritty gold got the same treatment as the chest gold, but this is the completed helmet ready for its lenses. The chapter colors, company colors of the face mask I think came out quite well. I'm excited to do 3rd and 4th company helmets. These helmets are really cool. So next up, I'm going to take some Mephiston Red, and we're going to pick out the entirety of the lens area with this one coat. Don't worry too much if you get a slight spilling onto the bottom part of the helm there, the face mask section. It will just help kind of create the effect of light spilling over. Next up, I would take some Troll Slayer Orange and pick it very carefully into the very, very corner of the bottom of the eye lens, before taking some White Scar and carefully picking out 2 dots on the top section and 1 dot, slightly larger, in the center of the Troll Slayer Orange we just put down. Be very careful at this spot because this paint, both the helm and the face mask, have gone through multiple layers to get them to where they are now, and it's going to be very difficult to solve mistakes at this point. Not my best lenses, but I'm also quite pleased with them as well. It's quite a deep recess on this helm here. Well, before we get on to the final shots, I'd just like to say thank you for making it this far through the video. Please like and subscribe. I apologize for the audio quality. My PC died, so I've lost all my settings and setup, so hopefully I can dial it back in, and I'll catch you all next week.